This is our presentation on parts 1 and 2 of the case study Colon Cancer, a Case of Genetic Bad Luck by Emma and Maddie. So what's the situation? Well, in this case study, we're introduced to two people, Jane and Sam, and Jane's brother recently got diagnosed with colon cancer, and Sam is her brother. And we know that her father died from colon cancer, and that her grandfather also died from some type of cancer too, but we're not sure which kind. And so Jane wants to know if she should get tested for cancer because of her family's history. Question 1 of part 2 asked us to draw Jane's family pedigree, focusing on the family relationships and shading the individuals that are affected with cancer. So given the information in part 1 of the case study, we know that her grandfather had some type of cancer, so he was affected, and as we can see, he's shaded in right here, meaning that he's affected with cancer. And we know that Jane's father also had colon cancer as well, so he's shaded in, he's affected. And we also know that Jane's brother, Sam, also just got diagnosed with colon cancer. And so all of the other family members are left blank because at this point in the case study, we're unsure of whether they are carriers or whether they're not carriers at all. So that's why Jane in particular is left blank, because we're not sure of where she stands in terms of her carrying or not carrying a gene for colon cancer. Question 2 asks, do you think Jane has good reason to be worried, and why or why not? So we believe that Jane should not be too worried at this point because the cancer seems to be X-linked, because only the men in her family have been affected by cancer. However, there is still a chance of her having inherited a recessive gene for cancer and being a carrier. So that is our answer to question 2. And moving on to part 2 of the case study, question 1 of part 2 asks, what does it mean if a tumor is classified as benign, and what does it mean if a tumor is classified as malignant? Well, benign tumors do not invade adjacent tissues, and they also don't spread throughout the body, so they're very concentrated in one specific part, and they're referred to as precancerous growths, and they are, like I said, they're controlled. However, malignant tumors are very different, and they arise from mutated benign tumors, and they grow uncontrollably, and they keep dividing and dividing. And so what results from constantly dividing cells is cancer. And so when they continue to divide and divide, they eventually are able to metastasize, and that's metastasizing is when these cells eventually invade healthy tissue, and they also spread throughout the bloodstream, and if that carries on without any treatment, then the organism can actually die. Question 2 of part 2 asks, why is it easier to treat a benign tumor than a malignant tumor? Well, benign tumors can be removed because they're in one concentrated area, like we mentioned before. However, malignant tumors are actively dividing and they spread throughout the body, so that makes it very difficult to remove all of the cells that result from malignant tumors. So if not all the cancerous cells are removed, the tumor can still continue to grow, and that's why it's much more difficult to treat malignant tumors than benign tumors. Question 3 of part 2 asks, what does it mean to be predisposed to getting cancer? Well, being predisposed to getting cancer means that you have a genetic inclination for it, and it's basically determined by your genotype. So if your family has a history of a certain disease, the odds of you inheriting it are greater than if your family did not have a history of it. So that's a pretty simple concept. And so question 4 of part 2 asked, if someone is predisposed to getting cancer, does that mean that he or she will definitely get cancer someday? Well, the answer to this is no, because being predisposed means that someone has a chance of getting cancer, whether it's caused by inheritance or environmental causes, for example, exposure to radiation. It does not mean that they will definitely get cancer. Like I mentioned before, being predisposed means you just have a greater inclination for it, and your odds are slightly higher of getting the disease than if you weren't predisposed to it. And that is the end of presentation 1.